Canadian banks have officially started debanking citizens, but Americans, you need to pay attention to this too, because the Canadian banks are using Canadians to help rip off Americans and destroy the American banking industry. That's why Donald Trump has had a problem with this for a very long time. It is a thorn in the side of the trade negotiations because Canadian banks are way overrepresented in America compared to American banks basically being non-existent in Canada. We're going to talk about the debanking stuff, but before we get into it, I have a few clips for context to show how bad the Canadian banking system is. There's a lot to talk about in today's video, so let's get into it.
If you're a small business in Canada, it's harder to get the kind of lending at scale when you're smaller than it is in the United States, and that potentially means less employment, less innovation, less productivity, less GDP growth.
So that's going to be an important talking point for a lot of the stuff that we are going to show, because during the trade negotiations, the banking system has been a problem.
Canada's banking system is one of the most concentrated banking systems in the G7 countries.
The banks know
it's actually one of the most in the world. It's just hard to manage because we're not going to break down Madagascar's banking system.
known as the Big Six hold 93% of Canada's deposits.
I think some people certainly would refer to it as an oligopoly.
Larger banks are less likely to fail than small ones because they have a more diversified depositor base.
Because we have always had more conservative lending standards and a sort of a safer system there, in 2008, we had no subprime mortgage crisis, no foreclosure crisis, no housing market collapse.
They say that as a benefit, but it's actually not, because since then, Canada's banking sector has been so restrictive that we essentially stopped lending to small business entirely, like she hinted to at the beginning. As a result, Canada is hemorrhaging small business, we are not innovating, and the banks now have complete and total control of 93% of Canada's entire banking sector. So they set the rules. Of course they're not going to fail, and they get to charge whatever they want. Canadians are getting ripped off, and it's being used for another reason.
Still be uninsured. They knew that they would always be protected because those banks were too big to fail.
And here's part of the reason, with the context that we're going to be talking about into the video, of why it's important that these Canadian banks are ripping off Canadians. So this is titled High Risk, High Reward, and we'll see why this is impacting both countries negatively.
One of the reasons Canadian banks have done well is because a lot of them have operations here in the U.S. where they can take more risk and make more money.
By 2023, half of everything the Big Six banks owned and owed was foreign, offshore, about 80% of it American. They're working in spaces that are far more volatile, far less regulated than what they're doing in Canada. And the truth is that if a Canadian bank failed because of some of these high-risk, high-return bets they're making in other spaces, it would be disastrous for the Canadian economy.
So yes, what's happening is the Canadian banks are using all of their leverage in Canada to take all of their risk in the United States. So they're allowed to go to the US and compete with lower fees and better products, and they're trying to be innovative, and they're buying up all these regional banks because they know they are too big to fail in Canada, and they have a security blanket in Canada that they are untouchable. So what are they doing? They're expanding like crazy with some high-risk activity, including some illegal activity, which they got in trouble for some money laundering with some cartels and some other things. And all of this risk is only able to be taken because they essentially run the entire country of Canada. As a result, Canadians get way worse service, less products, less competition, and this has been the impact to the Canadian economy. We will get into more of the crossover in a second before the debanking. This is all for context. It all comes together.
Canada's banking system is highly consolidated. They have for years lagged the performance of the U.S. economy.
The U.S. economy is roughly 13 times larger than Canada's, whose GDP is comparable to that of New York State.
When you have a concentrated system where 6 players really dominate the market, that allows that industry to be quite controlled by those 6 players. Canadian banks can charge more for service fees, and they do. They can keep competitors out. And there seems to be some evidence that they do that when you consider that there hasn't been a new big bank that has emerged in Canada since we became a country.
Did you hear that? There has not been a new big bank in Canada since we became a country. And just so you guys know, all of this is backed up with data. I have this book right here. It's called Fleeced. It is by an author named Andrew Spence. It's a very short book, but it explains all of the problem with Canada's banking and how Canadians are used to take advantage of Americans. And again, Donald Trump had a problem with this because only Canadian banks were going down into the US, but no American banks were coming up to Canada. And somebody's going to say, well, Amex Canada exists and they've got a line. Yeah, they provide credit cards and other things, but there's essentially no major banks, no consumer banking, no regional American banks that are coming up at all to compete in Canada. And we have articles like this that says Canadian banks' expansion into America has not gone well, says Veritas. The funny thing is with this article and why it didn't go well was all because TD was doing illegal things, trying to rip off their competition. They are not good at actually competing from being a good bank. They're just throwing enough money, buying competitors. Look at this here. Anyone living on the eastern seaboard of the US would be hard-pressed not to notice the ubiquitous TD Bank branches and their aqua green signs and matching decor. All told, TD Bank has 1,100 bank branches in the US and is currently the 10th largest bank in the country with $366 billion in assets. TD even muscled its way to becoming the third largest retail bank in New York. Yes, muscled its way into New York through aggressive acquisitions, and Canadians have suffered as a result. And we've seen it from other banks too, which we'll be getting into. I don't want to just beat up on TD. All of the banks are involved in this type of behavior, and why it's so bad, which they briefly said in the other video. The US economy is 13 times Canada's economy, but they're only just over 8 times the population. So they are well outperforming Canada. So I actually think it's worth, after this video is done, of course, I'm going to link down below the CNBC video because they try to make the arguments for either side on if the consolidation of banking is worth it. It's not, because it's prohibitive to the economy, because once they control everything, they control who they lend to, they control the industries they want to be successful. So even though the US is 8 times the population, they have 13 times the size of the economy because of the ability to compete and innovate. I've been yelling about Canada's banking system for a very long time on this channel. Speaking of, sign up for my Wealth Simple link down below. I'm going to bring that back. I haven't talked about it in a long time, but very applicable to today's video. So we can see the Canadian banks are behaving poorly inside of the US. We are actively blocking American banks coming up from competing. And someone's going to say, well, actually, technically, there's no actual laws to keep US banks out of Canada. Like the lady said in the video, like it's said in the books, all of the existing laws, which don't actually say American banks can't compete, are set up to make it so difficult, so impossible for any foreign bank to come into Canada and set up any meaningful footprint. Once again, Canadians, wake up. We're not better than anyone else. We should allow competition. This is the kind of behavior Canada has in a lot of our industries, and it's all just Canadian ignorance that says our telecom companies and our banking system and our grocery, everything is just one giant oligopoly. I wonder why these other countries and businesses don't compete, because it's designed so they can't. And that's how we're getting to a stage now where the media is starting to drip in articles like this. Here's why you could be debanked by your financial institution. They are getting Canadians ready to be kicked out of the banking system. And remember, the big 6 banks control 93% of the banking system. So like I said, you can try Wealth Simple, or if you want to be even more safe, try and use a local credit union or something you can have direct access to, because you might even get more favorable lending. More than 100 people have come forward to share their experiences with being dumped by their banks after CTV News reported on RBC cutting ties with a decades-long customer with no explanation. Thomas Nassab of Alliston told CTV News last month that he received a letter from RBC informing him that they were ending their banking relationship with him and that he would be given 30 days to close his accounts and move his money out of the bank. And yes, this article shares even more stories of Canadians being debanked. But not only that, there's no rules, laws, or regulation for why a bank would have to provide you an answer for why you're being debanked. So for no reason or any reason, they're allowed to shut down your entire banking profile and say, good luck, go find another solution. And they need to be held accountable, because we just got this announcement coming off the debanking announcement that TD Bank is closing a call center in New Brunswick. It's going to be hundreds of jobs, devastating to the local economy. So maybe instead of once again yelling at American companies for bringing their American IP down to the US, we yell at Canadian companies and hold Canadian companies accountable for destroying hundreds of jobs, a community, so that they can move a call center to another area, even though almost all of the banks have record profits, record performance, because they control everything. So as immigration has increased, that's new bank accounts, that's new lines of credit, that's new profit centers. They're able to make bank because they control everything. Yes, pun intended. Here's this video about what happened.
TD Bank is closing a major call center in Dieppe. The Toronto-based bank made the official announcement early this afternoon. CTV's Derek Haggett joins us now from Dieppe and has been following this story and has more. Hey, Derek.
Jesse, a spokesperson for TD Bank, confirmed to me today they are closing the Canadian Bank call center located here at Champlain Place Mall in Dieppe. How many people will lose their jobs isn't known just yet.
It's estimated to be over 500. Obviously, we'll find out, but over 500 jobs. And this should be nationwide news. This should be bigger than Stellantis, bigger than an American company going down to America to produce. This is a backbone, in theory, to the Canadian economy, and they're leaving. It's the same reason that I was so mad when that Scotiabank story that I talked about yesterday. Remember this? Scotiabank lays off staff across Canada as it streamlines cost. It must be really important for Scotiabank to streamline cost when at the end of the article it says in August Scotiabank posted third quarter profit that beat analysts' expectations. The bank also improved its profitability metrics with adjusted return on equity rising to 12.4%, up from 11.3% a year prior. They're streamlining costs, mind you. They are laying off Canadians to offshore the call center roles to other countries that will now be benefiting the banks inside of Canada that we already pay the highest fees for, that already won't lend for small business. It's destroying the economy. I'm telling you, read this book. It's so worth it. Bank of Nova Scotia, one of the strongest quarters we've ever seen from the bank in a long time. The National Bank of Canada analyst Gabriel Duchesne said in a note his clients, despite the better than expected credit performance, the bank maintained cautious conservative guidance, aka they are going to limit lending. They're going to make it harder for consumers to get ahead while they streamline costs. And that's two major banks who are offshoring roles. Obviously, they have to provide these call center services, so it's going to happen somewhere. So we've got RBC and all these banks that are debanking. Now they're laying off Canadians in the hundreds to now possibly thousands across all of the banks, and people continue to pretend that Canada is not manifesting its own problems, that Canada had not one leg to stand on. We were easily broken. As soon as the US said, fine, you can't manufacture all of our products anymore, Canada was destroyed because we've been sold out, domestically hollowed out, and crushed entirely by these banks. And this is why I'm going to remind you guys once again, I've shared this in multiple videos, but I just don't think Canadians are getting it through their head. It may be a tough pill to swallow for many Canadians, but Canada has a lost decade, and it has nothing to do with Donald Trump. Donald Trump just exposed it even more. It has everything to do with the people you voted for. No lies or excuses can make up for it. And then we see here Canada's major underperformance when it comes to GDP growth per capita. And GDP growth per capita is one of the most important standards when it comes to standard of living. Canada continues to fall. Obviously, a major problem being the mass immigration, which the banks were able to use for increased profitability. And now they're offshoring Canadian jobs. So keep in mind, they use the immigrants to pump up their profits, and now they're removing Canadian jobs, streamlining costs. It's sounding like I'm repeating myself, but it's just that important. Small business used to be one of Canada's largest, most important employers. We are now hemorrhaging small businesses because nobody is creating anything. It's just a bunch of oligopolies and the empire of the US who has allowed us to manufacture their IP. And don't get me wrong, it wasn't them just being super nice, obviously. It came down to profitability through these large corporations. It wasn't a charity event, but this is why Canadians get so mad. But this is what I'm calling out. I love Canada. I love America. I love Fortress America and what we could build here working together. But watching the parasitic Canadian banks use Canadians because we have the highest service fees, the lowest service quality, all of these things, to go take the high risk gambles in the US and buy up all their banks, consolidate their banking industry industry, becoming a top 10 bank through aggressive acquisitions is not good for the American economy long term. But Table Salt put out this tweet here, and this is basically what I'm calling out when I call out Canadian behavior, because I do love Canada, but the Table Salt says he is increasingly convinced that 90% of Canada's problems can be traced back to one cause: Canadian liberal arrogance. It's a unique blend of fake nice, sanctimony, and inflated self-importance mixed with below average IQ, that's pretty funny, and being totally unremarkable. And it's hard to deny when our own government is trolling us with stories like, we're taking action to protect our economy. CBSA is investigating whether certain imports of disposable paper plates, bowls, and platters from China are being sold at unfair prices in Canada or dumped because they're being subsidized. Really? With all of the problems going on in Canada, this is what the CBSA posts? That is some trolling from Canada's government. That's why when Table Salt calls out the arrogance, the unremarkable performance, it's not saying Canada sucks. It's saying it sucks right now, and we can fix it. We can turn it around. There's so many things. Canada has the most potential in the world, especially if we worked with the US. We weren't just taking advantage of the US. And I'm telling you guys, read this book and try and tell me Canada's banking is not destroying Canada and very uncompetitive and hurting us, especially in US trade negotiations. But if you made it this far in the video, you absolutely rock. Don't forget to like and subscribe. We're trying to get these videos out in front of more people. We are trying to grow the channel. If you want to support the channel, you can do it through the link down below. You can also do it through YouTube directly. If you're Canadian, I would strongly consider the Wealth Simple link that I put down below as well. You don't have to sign up. Do your research, of course. Maybe it's a bank you don't like, but it is one that's doing their best to try and take on the big six banks as of now. But thank you and have a great rest of your day.